Look at anything. Look at a room across the way. Like as I sit here now, it would be ideal to look into the kitchen area there. See what you would ordinarily see. You know, you see the refrigerator sitting there and blah blah blah. The dimness that's there, the entire thing has a sparklingness and a breathingness and an oscillation, very obvious. So one way to begin to explore this stuff is to experience the same thing in different. Like for example, if you're playing with the visual field, you can experience the same thing in different lighting conditions. You know, look at be with a space or something in a bright light, and then be with it in dimmer lights and dimmer lights and dimmer lights and dimmer lights, and then be with it in absolute darkness, and see what your experience is like. But it's the same, supposedly the same environment, but the texture of it will be radically different in different presentations. Not that that means anything in terms of one versus the other, but just to give more of an immediate awareness of the range of experiential textures that are always present, but that we typically gloss over, censor over, you know, by our skillful dullness. I'd like to go back to a couple of things that I touched on a bit earlier, and perhaps a little more elaboration. One of which was we were talking about being with a group rather than one-on-one, and I was pointing out how it's always one-on-one. There is no we, you know, because even if there's supposedly a group, each person is experiencing what they're experiencing and taking it the way they're taking it, and there's no commonality whatsoever. You know, you can say, well, we're all experiencing the same event, but in actual fact, everyone's experience of the event is going to be absolutely unique. And the supposition that, oh, it's going to be pretty similar is just not true. I mean, it's just really, you know, the range is inconceivable. Now, an aspect of this, or you know, associated with this, is that I touched on this earlier. Everyone is a sole inhabitant of their own universe. You live in your spirit, if you exist, which I can't tell. Just give me the benefit of the doubt, or it's contrary. Assuming you exist, you live, you're the sole inhabitant of the bubble of your experience. That is the only thing that exists. Nothing else whatsoever exists. Nothing outside it can be found. And everything inside it is the same as an apparition within that sphere. And you are the sole inhabitant. You're the sole perceiver of that. No one else perceives what you perceive. This is just pragmatism. There's no philosophical implications with this one way or the other. But it's very contrary to the normal way of thinking about things, where I'm a small entity in a big system where there's other entities present and we're all kind of in the same orientation to it. In actuality, you're the sole inhabitant of all space, and everything and anything whatsoever that appears to you. That's just a simple fact. Now, if you let yourself see that fact and experience it as the fact that it is, and feel the implication of that, what does that feel like? What does that really, what is that really? What's that like? Everyone else is an apparition. You can't know whether or not they exist. You don't know they don't exist, but all you know about them for sure is that they are an apparition. And you yourself are an apparition. You as as Pam, you as this body, your body just appears as an apparition in the field of experience. And the experiencer of that field of experience is not human. Humans appear in that field of experience, but the bubble of experience itself is not human, and the perceiver of that experience is not human. And think about that, really see the truth of that and feel what it feels like. It's very interesting. It has a very different implication, a very different implication.
It's quite empowering.
It is, it's very empowering. And it's undeniable. In that context, everyone who appears is there as a facilitating aspect of your karma. And not just everyone, I say everyone, that gives a privileged position to humans. Everything that appears. You know, but you're driving down the street and you drive past a car that's a particular color, that's there for you. That's there for your karmic process, whatever that is in itself, and so on and so forth. And you feel what that feels like. So that being the case, how could there meaningfully be a we? Yeah.
Well, it doesn't seem logical anyway for there to be a we if you consider an absolute. If you consider that you are, you know, it just seems obvious.
You know, it's very common in sort of human psychology to assume, well, you know, we're here and we're an us and we have a group flavor and a group mood and a group vibe and all of that. But all of that is largely hypnotic. You know, it's like being a fan for a particular sports team or being you know, belonging to a particular political party or something like that. You know, it's an imaginary tribalism which becomes actualized through people's participation in it. But it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, because you have a group of people and they say, yeah, we're all together and we're all for this. But if you look at what each individual person actually thinks about it, they'll all have completely different opinions. People don't agree. No one agrees about anything.
It's a diffusion of it too, it seems like, of the idea of, you know, this is your experience. This is you. Everything is you.
Yeah.
It's a diffusion.
I'm not sure I follow that, but that's okay.
Well, looking at it as a we is a diffusion.
Right. Oh yes. Yeah. Well, it's untenable because it's not supported by immediate experience. You have to take a leap. You have to extend yourself into a leap of faith to pretend that is so, when there's no immediate evidence for it. Whereas the immediate evidence of your own experience is undeniable. And because it's actual, it's powerful. So you basically, if you extend yourself to include other people as a we, you know, just as sort of a unit of identification, you're cutting yourself off from your own authority, from your own potency by degrees.
You know, if you are not the experiencer, is not human, the experiencer of the experience is not human, then what would you say? Can you say what is it then? Or
Can't be said.
Can't be said.
It's God. It's already in presence. It's the outline.
I mean, there's a tendency in people, spiritual people, to say, well, yeah, I'm not the body, I'm not this, I'm God, or I'm consciousness, and so therefore this body's going to die, but I'll still be around as consciousness. And, you know, and so in a sense, I wonder sometimes, aren't we just transferring our own little identification with this body to some other, to a concept.
Well, I'm not talking about a concept, and I'm not talking about identification. If you look and see what's seeing your experience, you won't be able to localize it. And you won't be able to psychologize it either, because it has no psychology. I mean, your personal, the psychology of you as a human appears within it. But it itself is beyond the psychology of you, and beyond the history of you. I mean, call it awareness if you want. Awareness is, has a neutrality that is not tainted by the individual psychology that may appear within it. It's what sees the psychology. And then all notions of persistence after death and all that. First of all, don't worry about it because you'll find out soon enough. And second of all, one way or the other. And second of all, I think you'll find with more experimentation that what sees your consciousness doesn't exist within time. So it's not subject to temporal events. So to say it persists after you die, and there's after and before or apparitional, they appear within the stream of appearance. Awareness is always now. It's atemporal, there's no time whatsoever. The appearance of time is phenomenal. The appearance of time is in the apparent dynamisms of apparitional patterns. Awareness, consciousness, if you want, whatever, and again, these words are unimportant because they aren't true. You can't actually label or define what you were talking about, so it doesn't matter what word you use. Yeah. But this that experiences your experience is always right here, right now. And it defines here. Here exists because of it, not the other way around. Now exists because of it, not the other way around. Here is here because it is. Now is now because it is. So time, even the non-time of the timeless present and the spaceless here, comes from what is seen as what you are. And again, the philosophy or theory about this is unimportant, but look for yourself, play with it.
Yeah, I can't say what it is. It seems like it's a complete mystery.
Of course, it's a big mystery, but it's actual. Yeah. Your experience is being seen. Right. Whatever that means. So it's a mystery, but it's not like just a mystery that throw up your hands and walk away. It's a mystery you can play with. Mm-hmm. You can poke at. You can, because it's actual. It's actually issue.
So that's what you mean by radiant presence. Knowing itself is that which sees our experience is radiant presence.
Yes.
So that's that activity.
Yes, what sees it is radiant presence. What is seen is radiant presence. It's an inside job. It's making its tail.
So really, we're just becoming familiar with that awareness which knows our experience moment to moment.
Yeah, and become familiar with the relationship between that awareness and the apparent apparitions that the awareness perceives. And you'll discover that it's hopelessly entangled. It can't be separated as a this and a that.
Self-reflexive.
Yeah.
In that context, there's a simultaneity then of all of our concepts of past, present, and future. They're always actually now, that all the concepts of past, earlier time and future time that these are all just concepts
Yeah.
that are the illusion of a separate self.
Well, they may or may not be the illusion of a separate self per se, but they are basically conceptual. But it's not a simple phenomenon. You know, time seems to exist largely because of memory. Now, memory always happens in the present. But memory is a very interesting thing because you can't verify. It's all very, very slippery. If you look at the flow of events, so we're having a conversation, and I can remember the last few words we said, vaguely, and so on and so forth. And it seems to be more or less a continuum in terms of up to now, what I'm actually saying at the moment, and so on. But if you look very closely at that, what's up with that, it's very interesting because it's always now. So it's always being kind of reverse generated in the present. And yet, that doesn't mean it's necessarily being fabricated, but it doesn't necessarily mean not. I mean, the whole thing is very slippery. But, the only reason we think there's time is because of memory, and memory is a very interesting phenomenon. But, one of the most obvious and accessible things about memory is it's a real-time event. The past exists now as your memory of it. Otherwise, there's no such thing. Where's the past?
Now, all of our attempts to understand this is really radiant presence attempting to understand its total mystery.
Yeah. And no question you can ask is ever answered. You can look at the mystery of the eternal now. You can look at memory and apparent time. It's not like you'll now I get it, it's this, that, and the other. It never resolves because this is intrinsically unresolvable. What you find is it is the way it is and you will never know what that is. But it is very specifically that.
Radiant presence without beginning or end this has always been the situation of radiant presence.
Yeah, well, it's beyond time. And yet, and within time, because time is within it. So here we are in time, supposedly, and this is radiant presence. And right here, we are outside time, and this is radiant presence.
The sense I get is like these computer programs that are now able to program themselves, they've gotten to this level of sophistication of artificial intelligence. And it's like, that's what my mind is doing. It's creating a story, it's creating history, which is a total illusion. But that's my reality. And radiant presence could give a shit.
Well, the radiant presence is doing all of that.
Yeah.
So there's no disjunction either. It's not like that's happening and his radiant presence over here is saying, screw that, I don't care.
Right.
That is radiant presence. And the way in which that's so is not particularly amenable to sorting out either.
But I guess from my point of view, it's this program that is significant. I mean,
Right.
I mean, obviously I'm engaged in it. But from a different perspective, it's just like static. It's like, I mean.
Yes. Radiant presence is peculiar, as you point out in this instance, because it appears radically different from different perspectives. The very same event or the very same context will appear to be something else completely, just by shifting perspective of observation. And no particular perspective is any truer than any other perspective. Is it noise and static? Who knows? Is it actual memory of actual event? Who knows? Is it nothing at all? Who knows? Is it? I mean, how many ways can you see it? But the point is, it doesn't resolve. There's no right way that it is that somehow is truer than the other wrong ways that it isn't. Because there's no way that it is. It's any way. It's any way that it is seen to be, and there's no limit to the ways it can seem to be. And none of the ways that it seems to be resolve down to enough coherence to be a particular way that you could identify or define.
But it seems weaker, though, if you don't recognize it. It seems it's different in that way if you're not recognizing or resting in that state of radiant presence. So, you see what I'm saying?
What seems weaker?
It seems like it's the same if you're not in it or if you're in it. It's still radiant presence.
Yes.
But when you're in it, you're more aware of it.
Yes.
To me, it seems like you're awake to it.
Yes.
Where you're asleep to it when you're in your conditioned state and you're going through your worldly movements
Yeah.
or thoughts.
Yeah.
So I lost myself.
One better than another.
It's easy, yeah, it's easy to get lost in here.
But there's nowhere to not be lost.
Oh, I know what I was gonna say.
Lost is what there is.
Exactly. I guess two obstacles for me. If I contemplate, for example, like, say the Kati channel or the lamp of the eyes, I can feel like I can get into that state or rest in that much easier. Where I'd rather, I want to be in that more instead of being asleep in my conditioned state.
Mm-hmm.
So the more I'm aware of it, the more it's that, wow, this is unbelievable, this is fantastic. So I want to experience that more.
Mm-hmm.
So by contemplating on that Kati channel, helps me to get in there. And then you've got Longchenpa's 21 symptoms that are ways to get into it, but you still have the obstacle of staying in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know it's the same on both sides. It's still radiant presence, but don't we want to always be aware of that?
No. What you want to be aware of is what you always are aware of. And awarenesses that come and go and do not have importance. You're free to pursue them all you want. But they're not important because the awareness that matters is the awareness which doesn't come and go. And this is an interesting point. In yoga, one does a lot of experimenting with navigating within experience to different perspectives. And the method used is largely hypnotic, which is exactly the method that's used in the examples you're talking about, where you see things from a certain perspective as a result of sort of following a certain train of thought or something, which is, you're basically hypnotizing yourself, which is fine. That's not putting it down. Hypnosis is the basic way that radiance orients itself within itself. It's the way it travels within itself.
Get you to understand it a little bit.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, so this navigating, this using these hypnotic means of navigating to get into these different conditions is very valuable, not necessarily because you're getting from an inferior condition to a better condition. It's valuable because you're learning more about what this is by experiencing it from more different perspectives. You're triangulating on something that is here that you cannot approach directly in a way that will end up with anything.
But don't push away from the world, or don't push away from the other, because it's one of the same.
Exactly. But so there's great advantage in exploration, but it's a big mistake to assume that one condition is superior to another, and you're getting from an inferior one to a superior one, and you're supposed to try and stay there.
Gotcha.
You can't stay anywhere. That's the very essence of delusion. That's the very essence of clinging, attachment, and technical Buddhism. But like I say, all of that is a very valuable experiment to discover the enormous range and variability of the ways this can present.
So through those methods, we're training in the subtler capacity of sensitivities.
Yes, exactly so. You're training in sensitivity.
Yeah.
By and large, yoga, the path of yoga unfoldment is basically sensitivity training. And the trick is to do it artfully enough and with a broad enough approach that you get outside of your own accustomed channels, get outside of your own paths, which will break down your the subtle tendency to identify yourself and your repertoire of possibilities.
And then work to not attach to any of it.
Well, you don't need to work to it. The non-attachment comes spontaneously as you become more and more sensitive to what it is. It becomes clearer and clearer that there is nothing to attach to, and there is nothing to attach to it.
Yes.
And as that becomes clearer, then attachment becomes an impossibility.
Non-issue.
It's wonderful. Yoga is wonderful as it happens because you don't need to actually do anything. You achieve everything simply by seeing what it is, and the implications of what you discover does all the work for you. Just seeing what this is, and all of the non-attachment and the non-identification and the heightened skillful means and all that just bang, it just comes with it because it's implicit in that. It's of its very nature. Not a good setup for someone with a cough.
So in that sense, the tantric practices of experimenting with different sensations and sensory experiences are valuable in increasing your sensitivity.
Certainly. However, the tantric path in general can pose a subtle, if you're not careful, can pose a subtle trap because of the idea of purification. The idea that you're purifying something, and then there's the wondering whether or not you're purified, and then there's something a little more that needs more purification, and so on and so forth. So in the course of all the experimentation of experiencing the other different textures and so on, you're also entrapping yourself in this framework of there's something that needs to be purified, which is not true, as it happens. And that idea, just holding to that idea, is liable to be an anchor if you're not careful. It's the main difference between tantric path and dzogchen. Tantrism is basically a path of purification. Dzogchen is a path of self-liberation. In Dzogchen, reality is known to be pure and perfect. Eternally pure and perfect beyond space and time, without flaw. And there is nothing else. So in Dzogchen, the only challenge is to realize that fact. Come to see that it's so, which is doable because it is so. It can be said that the tantric path is like arduously climbing a high mountain trying to get to the top, and the Dzogchen path is like an eagle landing on the top of the mountain. So they're fundamentally different. And at the end of the day, the real question is of which path wins is, well, is reality pure and perfect or not? Does reality need to be cleansed and cleaned up and purified or not? I guess I've made it clear what side I come down on. Feel free to select your own candidate.
I guess the pitfall is when you're extending your sensitivity, there's sometimes an attachment to the more subtle energies or sensations that you might experience, and then you sort of attach to those versus to the.
Yeah, but that's not important. Attachment doesn't matter at all, because if you're increasing sensitivity, it's self-remedying, because what you will discover as a result of increased sensitivity will ultimately invalidate attachment. You don't need to approach yoga with a clear mind or a clear heart. You can approach it very murkily and still have great success, because the very fact of what you discover will solve the problems that you're bringing to the table will solve your own sloppy orientations that you bring to the table.
And in Dzogchen, there's a lot of that entrapment potential going on when people feel they have to sit and develop Rigpa or sit and do the postures for Togyal. It's very much path oriented, which is maybe skillful means, but it's an illusion.
Yeah, it totally is. Well, I myself am quite critical of Tibetan Buddhism for this reason, because it's an institution. I mean, you have to look at Tibetan Buddhism, I feel, to understand it in toto, in context. Tibetan Buddhism it's not just Buddhism, it's also the politics and the sociology of the Tibetan people for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all sorts of politics in there of, which is the pure Buddhism, and, you heretics or we heretics. And I mean, the new schools were formed out of the claim that the old schools were heretics. They weren't Buddhists. And now that, and then Dzogchen is kind of being grandfathered in as acceptable, but in many cases it's had a lot of tantrism folded into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a kind of a modern approved, not necessarily uniformly, but a modern approved Buddhist platform, which has all of these, the different paths are all kind of versions of each other. But it's really, which was done for political reasons, and acceptance and what have you. I mean, it's a complex situation.
Mm-hmm.
But it does a disservice to the essence of what the information that is really trying to be conveyed.
Personally, like when I first got the Togyal teachings, which were, you only do them in these positions, and you only do them in certain times. And I found, well, once they're pointed out, they're like everywhere.
Yeah.
But you'd be like, oh, don't look, because you're in a crowd of people, or you're sitting on the toilet, or, don't look. And it's like, well, this is a whole different approach, because it's like, oh, you notice what you notice? Fine. Notice what's there, and don't seek it and don't reject it, and just.
And it is essentially the same thing. It's just bypassing all of this rigid formula that it has to be this way.
Right. And there's some sense of psychological development with those rigid formulas, like you're going to somehow become a yogi. You're going to preserve the tradition. You're going to, keep it in a container.
Yeah, all of which is just adding to self-identification and self-image and self-aggrandizement.
Mm-hmm. So at some point the container gets broken, and then there's a sense of,
But why not just start with the broken container first, and you don't have to go through all that.
Right.
Which is a little more like the three statements.
Yeah. Three statements of Dzogchen is very radical Dzogchen. It's essential. It's Dzogchen. It's not Tibetan Buddhism.
Your comments on the tradition, the Advaita tradition, just out of more curiosity.
I don't know much about it formally. I mean, I know a lot about modern Advaita, the sort of thing that proliferates on the internet these days and all that. I don't know much about it. I know there's all sorts of teachers who are classified as that, and basically anyone can do that without there's no peer approval or anything like that. So, I mean, I don't have much to say about it. In terms of traditions, the two traditions which I find most true and most powerful are on the one hand Dzogchen, and on the other hand Kashmir Shaivism, which is basically the same thing with a slightly different terminology and symbology, certainly different structurality. But they both, in their essence, are talking about what I perceive to be the way reality actually is. And as such, because they're more accurate, they're allowed to be more efficient and more powerful. Because you don't have to wait around the misconceptions. Stub your toe on, oh, well, I learned all that, but I didn't really need to. Next.
The 36 tattwas get really elaborate into describing our interpretation, how we interpret the mechanisms and so forth. But in the essence of it.
It's the same. I mean, but they're both fundamentally experientially based. They both start with, you are the absolute, you are reality, and every aspect of your experience is that, in the way that it is. And Kashmir Shaivism approaches it with this elaborate mapping system of the tattvas and all that.
Yeah.
But that's not the essence of it. That's just this is part of their baggage. And the Dzogchen commits the same crime with all of its structuralities and the three kayas, and they sort of specify all of these different entities as if they're actual categories, Well, there's a Dharmakaya and there's a Dharmadhatu and there's Yeshe and there's Rigpa and it's like, well, the Rigpa's over here and the Yeshe's over here, and it's like, it's not like that. Why have all these names for the same thing?
In Kashmir Shaivism, it just separates into pure and impure. So in
Yeah.
the model, I always took the impure, the interpretational activity,
Yeah, of course.
and yet my own nature is that pure.
Yeah, of course. Which is pretty accurate. I mean, it's our own sloppy interpretations that get us in trouble. What it is not, there's no problem there. And it turns out if you let yourself see that, if you let yourself see what it is, and you get to enjoy it, and enjoy yourself and enjoy what you are, what this is, the implications of which turn out to be absolutely wonderful.
Why then the importance on the gradual path, the method path, the path of purification? What's the whole premise behind that to even go down that road? Why is it even? What is it for?
I can't justify it. You're asking the wrong guy. I'm saying it's wrong. I think it seemed like a good idea at the time. It can't hurt. Yeah.
Because your whole life is wasted.
Yeah.
Like
I always say if you're going to start a race and you can start anywhere you want, why not start at the finish line? Well, I'm going to start 3 miles back from the finish line. It's like, okay, I'm starting at the finish line. Why make it any harder? It's hard enough anyway.
For some reason, their karma, there's a purification thing, karma that they're trying to.
Yeah, I understand.
For you to get it real quick when they finally teach it, or so they want you to have a certain kind of foundational way of thinking, so you.
I understand the argument, but I don't see it. I just don't see it because karma actually cannot be purified, whereas when you see that karma doesn't actually exist, it's instantly purified.
Right.
Karma does not exist because the patterns that constitute karmic events cannot be resolved. In other words, they don't. It seems to be a pattern, but you're looking for the pattern. And it's an infinity that does not, a non-resolving infinity that endlessly diverges from itself, so you can't pin down what it is, so it's not anything. And all of karma is made of these elements that are unresolvable, so you can't find them. So where did your karma go? I mean, it's right here, but you can't find it. All these patterns are right here, but if you're looking closely, you can't find any of them.
And even in our own experience of like, if something happens, like I had a broken leg once, which was horrible, but I look back on it, it was a wonderful experience. And so it has all these other aspects to it that, are just infinitely expansive.
And everything
on anybody, but it's kind of cool.
Everything whatsoever has an infinity of aspects, all of which diverge from the other aspects. So it's not like they have aspects and then a few more aspects. It's like, no, there's aspects to the end of the world and past it. And that's really what yoga is about. That's what the sensitivity training is about. It's coming to see the range of aspects and implications that any simple experience actually includes and consists of. You cannot find simple. You start with anything and you end up with everything. Substantially, literally. But you have to see for yourself the way that that's so. And when you see that, there's no karma. Karma hasn't gone away. It's as apparent as it ever was. It just doesn't exist. It's not that. It's like you can look up in the clouds and see that they all look like, Trump's soldiers and missiles. you know, you don't need to get rid of Trump soldiers and the missiles. Just see that they're clouds and there's no patterns there, and you solve the problem. To see what it is, and the problem goes away because the problem was misidentified by misinterpreting the experiential basis that was the evidence for that interpretation.
I feel like to express appreciation for all the gradual vehicles that are available.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that everyone gets to pick and choose.
Oh yeah, sure.
What they want, and I feel like from the Dzogchen perspective and what we're speaking of here today, that absolutely everything is great perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Even all these gradual vehicles.
Oh yeah, of course.
Trying to renounce everything or transform. It's like, it's just perfect. Like, to me, that's the essence of compassion. You know, the idea of compassion was brought up, and perhaps this is, there's a teacher for everyone. And
sure. But, you know, and it's said, and I agree that this stuff is not for everyone. A lot of people are they're going to listen to this stuff and say, God, what kind of gobbledygook are you talking about?
exactly.
And, you know, that may be true. And if so, you know, it's nice to have alternatives, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, everyone's winging it and everyone's giving it their best shot and everyone's doing what makes sense at the time. And, you know, so whatever you're doing, and also whatever you're doing leads you to the next thing you do, which leads you to the next thing you do, which ultimately leads you to realization. So there's no harm, no foul. There's no wrong terms. It's just a matter of relative efficiency, arguably. But since there isn't actually time or space, that gets kind of slippery too.
Peter, can you talk more before you mention exploring your own nature?
Mm-hmm. Not so much exploring your own nature as taking advantage of your nature.
Can you speak more about that? Because you're saying it is sort of it is a completely unique individual experience.
Yes. Well, certainly that. Your nature, whatever it is, you know, whatever you consider to be flaws or strengths or shallownesses or partialities or eccentricities, your nature is your power because it's your actuality, your functional actuality. So that becomes the basis of all your engagement. And the strongest and most efficient way to engage in that is to give it free rein, to be what your natural inclination is to be in loose terms.
How is that different than what pretty much anybody is doing already? Are people following their inclinations already, or
well, everyone follows their inclinations. A lot of people are probably just tormented about it. But following your inclinations, I'm not talking about just about following your inclinations, but following your inclinations in the context of yoga. So using your inclinations as a way of exploring the more subtle aspects of what is here, and especially exploring what is actually here in distinction to what you're used to thinking it is. Yeah. And the essence of practical yoga is noticing the way in which your experience, your actual real-time experience, diverges from your concept of what's happening. And so the ways or the directions or vectors that you may feel like you're moving in, what have you, whatever, in the course of that process will be strongest and most efficient if they're your most natural line of least resistance, inherent desires or you know, aspirations, or the way your very nature tends to want to be if it was uninhibited.
This is confidence.
certainly-
You're really talking about confidence.
Yeah,
Just having confidence in your, just who you are.
yeah, in fact, yeah.
Uniquely.
Yeah, exactly. And from a yogi point of view, that's sufficient. You don't need to, you're not supposed to be different than you are as a starting point. And which can be a big hang-up because psychologically, most people are more or less filled up with degrees of self-loathing, in subtle ways and so on and so forth. And even with that, even in the context of that, all of that you are by your nature, whether you like it or not, is your strength. It's your power. And so you use that power and you're working most efficiently with your nature, rather than having to tiptoe around yourself and partialize yourself out. It's like fighting a fight with one hand tied behind your back. Why not use both hands?
No one can really tell us what that is, except
No.
we're the only ones who can really discover
Yeah.
that and expand on it.
But that's one of the three statements, isn't it? Confidence, isn't that one of them?
Well, basically, the three statements is confidence in liberation, which is basically seeing that. And you have to, looking at the three statements, you have to look at them sequentially to understand what they each refer to, because each one refers back to the previous one by degrees. So first you have the direct introduction to nature of mind. Second, you have decide upon one thing, which basically means see that everything whatsoever is that thing. So it's not like, there's a nature of mind and then there's also all this other stuff.
That's more of conviction, right? I guess.
Well, you see that it is so. So it's
The only thing.
Yeah, one thing. So you decide upon one thing. I mean, it's a funny way that they put it that way. I don't know if it's an artifact of the translation out of Tibetan or what. So you have direct introduction to the nature of mind. You've resolved that everything is that. That's not just the crucial point, that's the total point. And the third is you rest in that, because the essence of the nature of mind is unresolvability, is emptiness. Emptiness and dynamism. And everything that happens, you don't need to suppress anything or fight anything, because everything that happens liberates itself by disappearing. and even before it's disappeared, when it's here, you can't find it. So, emptiness permeates it, before, during, and after. You can't find anything. And you rest in that fact, the certainty of that fact. And it's not something that you maintain or hold as a stance or an aspiration. You just see it. It's a no-brainer. It's like, well, obviously. So resting in it just means you're there. It's not like there's a fourth step that you then move on to.
It's so easy, but it's so difficult. So you kind of.
Well, it's difficult depending on the degree you see it. I mean, all of those three steps depend upon the previous step. So, the first step is the kicker. You have to really have an introduction to the nature of mind. And the more profound that is, then the others are based on that, that follow from that. If you don't have it, Dzogchen doesn't work without introduction to the nature of mind. It doesn't work. You have to see the truth of it before it becomes powerful.
I feel like this morning, though, that's the way you brought it up is better than the introduction to nature, right? I'm not just saying.
We try.
It seems much simplistic, but yeah.
It is simple. It's very simple. It's just this. It's right here. It's all empirical. There's no theory involved. It's this that is right here. And if you look and see what it is, it'll be immediately obvious that it doesn't accord at all with what you're used to thinking it is. And if you look more closely, you discover these obvious principles of unresolvability and so on and so forth. None of which are important per se individually, because they aren't separate principles. They're all just aspects of the way this is what it is. And that's the fabled nature of mind. It just means actuality. The actuality of your experiential field. Just as it is. It's a whole shooting match right there, really. And then you just look at that, and then the implications of everything follows from that. Everything follows from the implications of what that is. So the more clearly you see and know that, then the more clear the implications are, and the more it's like falling off a log to own those implications, to live them, so to speak. It's all about seeing. It's seeing what it is power, because it invalidates error. It doesn't even need to eliminate it, just invalidates it. The mind is going to continue spinning off bullshit, till you drop dead, and possibly afterwards. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because it's not true. And once you see that it's not true, then you're invulnerable to it. You don't have to become sane. You just have to see that you're crazy. And then it's no wonder you're thinking a lot of crazy bullshit, because you're crazy. What do you expect? And so you become free of it without even needing to solve it. And again, that's self-liberation. It liberates itself just by the way it happens to be, by what it happens to be.
We embrace our confusion.
Oh, yeah.
Confusion is what there is. There's no coherence. Coherence is a myth that the interpretive frameworks try in a conceivable effort to manufacture, and it always fails. There is no coherence. There's infinite divergent differentiation. And yet all this infinite divergent differentiation never departs from this. It's the weirdest thing. How can that be?
You go to those levels, and then you think, how can something be the great transference? How can somebody walk through? How could something like that be? And you can read those texts and read those stories. It just amazes me because it feels like you just clear a giant path by not non-attaching, but by understanding, by just complete understanding that you never understood, like that before.
Yeah. That's a degree of realization. Realization in the course of yoga, there will be deepening and progressive realization or realizations, which culminates in realization proper, which is a different thing. It's the same thing but different. It's like reaching a watershed or a tipping point in a scale. I should use two words probably. I don't like words like enlightenment and all that because they're so full of fantastic implication. Realization is a very good word because it's very specific. Realization just means realizing what is. You realize what is here.
It's complete understanding.
Yeah. It's just you just realize, I see how this is.
So is the tipping point that it's like a point of no return?
I wouldn't put it in those terms, but it's arbitrary. I don't know that it can be described. There can be deep realization and still the yogi is not being realized because there may still be some subliminal orientations going on. One reaches a certain point where all orientations are seen as arbitrary, all. And when that point is reached, one is free of orientations without needing to be free from orientations. Orientations become arbitrary, they become like games one can play. So you can dip into identifying with your personality, or dip into identifying with this, or dip into identifying with that, but it's not entrapping because it's known to be entirely arbitrary, and there's no actual separation or demarcation of any kind of states. It's just the one continuum, one infinite, unresolvable continuum. And so all these different seeming modes of perspectives of orientation within it are arbitrary and have no implication whatsoever.
there's been a departure and there's no arrival.
When I heard you in Seattle, you mentioned like the first phase of yogic practice compared to the secondary phase.
Yeah.
Almost like a development and completion stage where you're becoming familiar versus almost like perhaps dissolving all of what you were habituated with.
It kind of tends to look like that, and that's just something that I've observed, it's kind of formality. I think generally speaking, in a path of yogic unfoldment, initially one is fighting to get out of or get away from interpretive frameworks, fighting to get out of them, and then you suck back in. So interpretive frameworks are like the black hole, and you're trying to get escape velocities to get out, and there's a kind of an oscillation or dancing around with that. And then in sort of the middle phase of yoga, you sort of attain escape velocity, and then you're out. You've left the planet. The interpretive frameworks are over here, and you're over here. But that's only halfway done. And then the final phase of yoga is you go back to the interpretive frameworks and discover that they're exactly the same thing that you found when you left them. And that's where liberation comes from. Liberation isn't leaving the interpretive frameworks. It's becoming free of them by seeing that they don't exist, even as they exist. They don't need to negate them, they just don't exist.
So is the distinction between generating an interpretive framework, which you say, we'll just go on indefinitely, and then, if you will, being identified or lost in that actually that distinction doesn't actually exist between those two?
I'm not sure I
you can't
follow
resolve those as being something any more than you can resolve anything else.
Oh yes, ultimately, absolutely.
Right.
Ultimately, you can't distinguish at all. Interpretive framework.
Right. Which is just, it's it's amazing to, it's amazing to grok that in some sense.
Yeah.
But curious when so much of the teachings are about, you just said that essentially. It's like, there's these, you framed it in a certain way, and you held it very lightly at this kind of process of making that distinction between being in interpretation and recognizing the interpretation can't actually hold reality.
Yeah.
But what we call an interpretation is, doesn't actually exist.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you see that it doesn't exist, then you're free of it without needing to be outside of it. And that applies not just to interpretive frameworks, although in a certain sense, interpretive frameworks are anything that seems to be anything, but it applies to anything whatsoever. When you see that nothing exists, then obviously what's there to be afraid of?
Right.
What's there to avoid?
But when earlier, just a few moments ago, you were talking about how one can still be sort of not even aware that they're still kind of orienting to certain frameworks.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So what exactly are you speaking about when you say that then, if such a thing actually doesn't exist as an actual thing you can?
Well, it doesn't exist, but it seems to exist sufficiently for the person to be trapped and oriented to it. The fact that interpretive frameworks don't exist doesn't do much good for all the crazy people wandering around, voting for Trump and such.
For example.
Just to pull something out of my hat.
Right.
And no offense to any Trump supporters here. Just an arbitrary example.
Stop insulting me. But can't you, if you pull the interpretive framework, if you pull the intellectual concept off, doesn't that take away the framework itself?
It can, but you can't. Doing that on an intellectual level is not powerful. In other words, arguing with yourself, or let's say debating with yourself to establish how it is useful, but it's not ultimately effective. Because it's not just a matter of logic, it's also a matter of belief.
Well, it's like the analogy of the mind up here and the sounds you hear a bunch of garble.
Yeah.
You don't put the concept to what's coming in.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like that would pull off that would undo it.
Well, yeah, maybe have at it. I mean,
No, I just,
whatever does the trick, whatever works, it's like there's no rules or, you have to do this in that order and you have to do it this way. It's like,
but I guess that does show that intellect is almost,
it's what, sorry?
the intellect the intellect is there to help you, but at the same time, it's there to almost kind of work against you.
Well, the intellect is hampered by the symbols that it uses. The intellect itself is fine, because intellect is an expression of intelligence. But because you're using symbols which are hopelessly crippled by their very structure, the symbols such as words cannot refer to actuality. Can't be done. They're wrong because they have nouns and there's no things. They have verbs and there's no actions. They have adverbs and there's no findable qualities and so on and so forth.
They have no existence.
Huh?
They have no existence, basically. They're substantially.
Well, that's a given. Everything's like that. But their supposed meaning doesn't apply to anything, and yet their whole strength lays in the claim that it does. If you're thinking about something, if the words don't actually apply to it, the claim that you're thinking about something is just like what?
It's not intrinsic, basically.
Yeah.
It's almost man-made.
Yeah. But when one discovers that, one relinquishes dependence upon the conscious intelligence without necessarily suppressing it. And one goes to the inherent intelligence, which is a nonlinear, irrational intelligence, which a logical mind is actually an extension of. And the inherent intelligence is not dependent upon process. It is irrational and is capable of amazing functionality, like I said, without process and without rationality or logic at all. And when one comes to that very naturally, when one, as you say, when one discovers the paucity of logical mind and of a lot of the symbols that it uses.
Where would you place the intuition in this constellation of logic and intellect?
Well, it's not a separate thing. I mean, nothing is, intuition is an expression of inherent intelligence. Everything is an expression of the inherent intelligence. All apparent structurality and all apparent functionality is an expression of the inherent intelligence. To put it in a blanket statement. So intuition can be shoehorned in there somewhere. But none of these things, I'm sort of describing them as this, that, and the other. None of these things actually exist as separate entities. There's only radiant presence. And so when I talk about inherent intelligence, that's just a seeming aspect of radiant presence. You can't find it. You don't know that it exists, but it kind of seems to in terms of how it seems to behave. But again, you can't find any of that. You look for how it seems to behave and you can't find that. And the whole thing is so tricky because you can't find any of it. You can look at it and talk about it very intelligently, but it's all bullshit because you're looking for it and you don't find anything. It's just, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing.
It's all kind of playing around with the radiance.
Yeah.
But when you look to find what you're playing around with, you don't see anything but the radiance.
Yeah. And you can't find the radiance. But it never goes away. You understand?
Now, you also include the pure sense, I mean before interpretation, just sense perception, direct sense perception. Just seeing is radiance.
Absolutely, 100%. But I mean, everything is, but that is very explicitly so. It's a really good way to enter into yoga for beginners because it's already there and it's already virgin. It's already completely untainted by interpretation, and it's so obvious.
Which is the eye faculty, because the eye faculty is the easiest one because it's directly in front of you. Is that what you mean?
Oh, which I'm sorry, but which I lost you somewhere.
I got hung up here. He was talking about seeing and how it, for beginners, you said that's the most obvious.
Oh, yeah, I was talking about the sensory experience is intrinsically outside of interpretation,
Oh,
except in the mind.
I see. Okay. I was going into the eye faculty and the ear faculty.
Oh, yeah.
The easiest one is the eyes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
For most people, the eye is dominant.
Sure.
It's like shooting fish in a barrel to use that, to look at the visual function.
Yeah.
It's so obvious. Why don't we have a 5-minute break? I'll see you in 15 minutes. I'm sort of hitting a field of local time, you know.
Mañana Santa Fe time.
Santa Fe time, yeah.
Because it's on the mirror.
Right.
Funny, but
Non-compos mentis.
Tigers. Shark. Surprised there's an industry. Shark. Goats.
Peter, we were talking a little bit about intuition and what group that you were giving to intelligence, which is not intellectual.
I'm sorry, what about
You
that?
said something about it.
Yeah.
You worded it non-intellectual intelligence.
Yeah, I call it the inherent intelligence, but whatever. Doesn't have a name.
And it seems to me where I'm at in sort of the day-to-day that the intellectual is in the habit of making the situation a problem that needs
Right.
sort of a solution based on the already given concepts in sort of from the past, basically.
Right.
And all that is seen, and yet there's a habit to go into that,
Yeah.
which there's an intuition that it's kind of a waste of time, but I still do that.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, no harm, no foul. The fact that you do that probably doesn't really matter a whole lot one way or the other. And on the other hand, as you come to see that is pointless, you will probably, even as you're doing it, be doing it with less investment and with more of a sense of random access, raw intelligence, working through that. Thinking mind, rational intelligence and inherent intelligence are not contraries, they're not mutually exclusive. And as you get more used to trusting and resting within the inherent intelligence as your mental functionality, you will tend to use your rational functionality as an extension of it more and more. So because they're not really contraries. Habit, talking about habit is an interesting thing because the yogi will come up against habit, and habit can initially seem very hampering. After a while, it becomes less and less of an issue as it becomes clearer and clearer that the orientations and behaviors that are habitual and that one tends to go back to don't have any importance one way or the other. So even if you do behave habitually, it doesn't really matter. And that becomes clearer and clearer as yoga develops. Yoga is only really challenging and complex in the beginning. Then it seems, there seems to be contraries, and there seems to be this versus that, and the one thing seems to sabotage the other, and
It seems to be a conflicted sort of.
yes, a lot of extreme conflict. As yoga develops, that conflict is seen through, and it's discovered to not be an actual conflict. You discover what principles are powerful and what principles are relatively weak. And the powerful principles dominate, and those become the ones that you trust and you go to in your yogic functioning. In a strong sense, yoga is empowerment. Yoga is becoming, actualizing the inherent strength that you are. And as yoga progresses, you become stronger and stronger because you learn how to recognize your strength, and you learn to discount and ignore what is not strong, really not struggle against it because it's a waste of energy. And so you orient more and more and settle more and more into your strength, which of course maximizes your strength.
also have in correlation with activities?
Accidentally, not insignificantly. It shows up in activities. Activities in general don't have much importance though, so.
I meant more on whether there's less of activity in general because there's
There
less.
may or may not be. There can be all kinds of oscillations behaviorally, which aren't particularly important in themselves. And also there can be a kind of a correction as you come more into your genuine nature. Your behavior and your activities and all that may undergo some degree of a metamorphosis or shift as things that you got into from a position of weakness are released and things that have more inherent value to you become more emphasized. But that all takes care of itself, so it's not worth any concern or consideration.
Would you say it takes care of itself whether or not we have intentionality around that?
Oh, definitely. Intentionality reveals itself as a red herring pretty early on. We talked about that a little bit earlier. The powerful, the important intentionality is the inherent intentionality of your nature, as opposed to some aspiration of what you think you should be doing or are trying to do, which is intrinsically weaker. And ultimately is discovered, or I should say, pretty early on is discovered to be a pretense. And so, what's the point in participating in pretenses? You just don't get much from them. And that's, unless you enjoy it. And all of this, it's important to understand that you have absolute carte blanche. If you enjoy doing something, do it. What the hell, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you don't do. It's not like you have to do this or have to do that. So by all means, enjoy yourself. Have some fun. Why not? Unless you enjoy punishing yourself, in which case, have at it. Whoopee. A very simple, extremely direct, and ultimately profound yogic practice is just feel present. There's presence right here. Just feel it. You don't need to hold it or maintain it, just feel it. It's ultimately transcendent. Completely obviously so. In all of this, in general, in terms of these kinds of experiments and yogic explorations and practices and such, be very gentle and light and playful with it, and do not try to hold on to anything. So, if you find yourself exploring a certain perspective or a certain texture or something, just be with it as it's there, and as it begins to drift away, don't try to hold it, just let it go. Let it go. Let everything go. Be very, very easy and playful with it. So it's not a matter of finding or creating states and trying to maintain them. On the contrary, just be with it, feel it, and learn. Let it show you what it is by feeling. It's all about feeling. Your radiant presence is felt. It's a full-on, full body texture, so to speak, although not necessarily with the body. A full consciousness texture. You hug it with your aura. And in that there is a revelation and a display of its nature. And you don't need to get it or not get it, just feel that, and then as it morphs or mutates or drifts away, which it will, just let it go. This is not about achieving something. On the contrary, it's about discovering the fact that there's absolutely nothing to achieve. Fortunately, because good luck with that.
It seems like a lot of people find it advantageous to be out in nature more.
Mhm.
Do you see any validity in that, in its helpfulness, or?
Well, I wouldn't say helpful. I mean, whatever you enjoy, if you find it, nourishing or pleasurable, by all means have at it. But I would say, on the contrary, it can be very good experiments and exercises to do things that you don't usually do and that are contrary to what you usually do, just as a way of putting yourself out of your normalcy. So if you like nature, go take a walk in a slum sometime, that kind of thing. It's not like you need it's no big deal, but just as a kind of, think of it as kind of equal time. In general, what you find valuable can be a trap. Be careful of that, because if you find it valuable, there may be or is likely to be a subliminal contrary of something else that is not valuable or less valuable, or it's being devalued. This is better than that. Challenging that is more valuable than playing into it. Although, again, if you enjoy it, just have at it, because there's nothing wrong with pleasure.
It's kind of hard to see, maybe tease the difference between that and your karmic makeup.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You play with it, you do experiments, you try things, and you learn from doing. You learn by doing. You learn how to do it by doing it. Yoga can't be taught, it has to be discovered.
Would you say an inherent intelligence is something that you learn or something that you just let you allow?
Well, neither. You discover that it already is in full force.
I guess that's what I meant by allow, but.
Yeah, but it's allow isn't a good way to put it because you can't really not allow it. It's more like it's always been working there behind the scenes, and for most, say, for typical people with a consensus reality worldview, they may not be aware of it or may not have acknowledged it.
Or it shows up as neuroses, something, getting them in some other.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, it's always present. It's always in full effect. You could say that the symptoms of inherent intelligence is functional engagement on every level, or any level, or dysfunctionality on any level. So anything whatsoever that seems to occur, that seems to be functionality, is the inherent intelligence. So your heart's beating, that's the inherent intelligence. You're breathing, that's the inherent intelligence. You can walk, that's the inherent intelligence. You can have a good idea once in a while, that's the inherent intelligence. It's the inherent intelligence that does yoga. So the more you open to it, the more engaged and efficient the sort of the looping into yoga becomes. The inherent intelligence is transpersonal. It's not a human function. It's not a function of your personality. There's no barrier between it and your personality, but it is beyond. You could say it's the dreamer of your experience.
And that's happening whether, like that was my question earlier, that's happening whether we want to engage with it, act like it's there, but it's happening anyway.
Yeah, it's already the
Because I
case.
guess my question, I keep coming back to me as well, what's it matter?
It doesn't matter at all. None of this matters.
Sometimes it's like we're trying to grab hope here that there is that it matters somehow when it seems like it comes back. There's
no. This is a good point. It's important. Yoga has no importance whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason it would have any importance is if it seems to have importance.
Mm-hmm.
And if it seems to have importance to you, then that's the importance it has.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like going out on the street going, you should learn yoga. You know, it's like, why?
I thought we needed to dress up on Sundays and knock on people's doors. Oh, yeah.
You do that. I mean, spirituality and yoga is a very peculiar thing. It's meaningful to an individual if it is meaningful to the individual. And those to whom it is meaningful, it tends to become profoundly meaningful. Perhaps.
My experience has been that the more I'm familiar with this, the less important it seems to be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like really surprising to me that I'm going into like the other direction now. Like,
well, it has no importance. It's just life. It's already happening. I mean, it's really it's a bizarre thing because it's nothing. It's what's already always the case, and so it's this very bizarre situation where you're exploring what you've already explored and discovering what you already know, and it accomplishes absolutely nothing and changes absolutely nothing. I mean, how weird is that? And yet, it's ultimately profound. So what?
Yeah, there's not much you
I
can
mean,
do with it.
it was already ultimately profound, whether you knew it or not. You know, it's really just a kind of a taking advantage of the possibility if you have the inclination, you know, and ultimately that's the only justification. Most people have no use for this stuff at all. You're kidding me? Yoga? You call this yoga? Where's the mats? Where's the spandex?
You're talking about doing what you like, and it seems like that's mostly what's happening anyway. So people like, it feels, there's a big kick to believing in things, like going to a movie, like believing it's real.
As long as that's more pleasurable than not, then have at it, and that's how it is for most people. But you know, for the very few people for whom they get an itch to look at alternatives, and that's where this stuff becomes relevant.
It's kind of like you play Monopoly and you kind of like it, you're sort of losing or something, and then you throw the board up in the air, the pieces get mixed and the money gets mixed, and you realize that it was all made up. Anyway.
Yeah. No, it's true. Major destructive acts can be potent yogic practices, no doubt about it. Or constructive acts, for that matter. Destructive, probably more powerful. I think that's why there's so many wrathful deities.
In Dzogchen, there's a great emphasis on devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say a little bit about that? The function, the function of devotion.
The truth of devotion, the truth of Guru Yoga is the spontaneous subsuming the self in revelation, you know, typically personified by the Guru. A strange thing happens in the course of transmission. One becomes the Guru. It's very peculiar.
One
becomes the teacher, becomes the Guru, becomes the revealer. It's an absolute intense impersonal communion beyond space and time and beyond individuality. Yeah, I'm talking about Guru Yoga in the context of Tibetan. But the truth of it, I think, enacting it the way it's done in tantrically and so on, visualizing the Guru and the rays of light and all this sort of thing, is an enactment of something that in the genuine thing itself occurs typically interpersonally. And it happens not as a contrivance or as an enactment, but as a genuine connection. And it's beyond devotion. It's not a devotion of emotional devotion or personal devotion. It's a communion. It's a communion of the most absolute transparency and absolute intimacy. Not necessarily explicitly or making a big deal out of it, but in fact. But again, that becomes relevant for you when it becomes, if and when it's relevant for you. And I think that my personal opinion is trying to contrive it by enacting it as a ritual is liable to be more of a distraction than a genuine help. It's better to relax and wait for it. It's kind of like getting hit by a bus.
Don't think about it.
Just go out and play in traffic, and sooner or later, maybe the bus will find you.
Could you say that the Guru Yoga, I guess, from a transmission standpoint, would be kind of like what you were talking about with the bubble, being a guru, being an apparition for your personal experience, and you then becoming a guru?
It is that, but I hate to say this because I don't think that it's true, but in a way it's relevant. Transmission happens outside the bubble.
Outside.
Yeah, and I don't have any idea what I mean by that.
That's it.
Transmission is completely magical and inconceivable.
I've often wondered about that and really how transmission works, because I've heard it several times.
It's miraculous. So.
Yeah.
How's it work? How's that work? Well, let's see. Let's draw a schematic here.
Well, I've heard confidence. It brings confidence into you to where.
Well, it brings certainty. It's much stronger than confidence. Real transmission gives certainty. It's revelation.
I've heard you during this talk today, Peter. It occurs to me that we are the ones who really initiate ourselves.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No one else can initiate us.
Oh yeah. It's not about interpersonal at all.
The transmission is always coming from who we truly are.
Oh yeah. Transmission is karmic. Transmission is not fortuitous or circumstantial. It's like an alignment of the stars.
Isn't what you were talking about earlier with recognition synonymous to that? That it's something that just, comes, and we shouldn't seek it, and we should.
Yeah, in that sense, sure.
And it's.
I mean, well, you feel free to seek it, but you can't contrive it. And it's not a formality.
And it's also not within the bubble.
Well, there's nothing but the bubble, and yet it seems meaningful to me to say that.
Because it's non-conceptual.
Well, it's totally non-conceptual.
Start there.
But I can't say much about it. I mean, speaking from my own experience, which is the only thing I can speak from, the single most powerful experience in my life was what I would describe as transmission from my master. It completely, to say it transformed me or shattered me or whatever adjective you want to throw on there, it would be an understatement. And it was completely surprising, go figure. But anyway, so since I can't really talk about it, I don't see much point in talking about it. And I'm sure it's not always huge, earth-shaking. There's probably all sorts of degrees of transmission and degrees of, degrees of getting zapped, so to speak, and so on and so forth. Anyhow, it sorts itself out, so it's kind of pointless to talk about because it's not anything you can actually do anything about. It's kind of an interesting curiosity.
You feel transmission is ongoing, constant?
Yeah, sure. In a profound sense, absolutely. I mean, what is meant by any of these words, if it even can be differentiated, is tricky. Revelation is ongoing. Transmission is like an alignment where all of a sudden revelation is crystallized and powerfully manifests. I could say poetically.
Would that be different than inherent intelligence that you were describing earlier?
No, it is inherent. It is in inherent intelligence, and it is pure inherent intelligence. It's the revelation of inherent intelligence. But again, I really feel like it's getting into pointless mysticism talking about this stuff. I mean, it's kind of fun in a way, but it's more anecdotal than it is relevant.
Would you do a little more on when she was asking about devotion?
Huh?
And the idea that to have devotion seems like it requires a bit of a subject and an object.
Exactly.
So I get into states where I feel really high and wonderful and great, and I want to thank something, and then I kind of catch myself. What is there to thank here that I can't quite.
Yeah. But again, it depends on what you mean by these words. And if you look at what devotion seems to be superficially, if you look at it more profoundly, it may morph and reveal itself as something different than that.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, language is so inherently imprecise that, talking about something as if there was a particular something we were talking about is dicey. Well, technically, since I'm a big stickler for formality, technically, we're 10 minutes past quitting time. I'm quite happy to go another 10 or 15 if you'd like. If you feel like you're getting burned out, we can knock off and resume tomorrow. Either way. I know this sitting with this stuff can be kind of wearing on the long haul.
It's just getting good.
I like your attitude.
You mentioned
Go for the jugular.
Yeah. You mentioned the practice to stop and feel presence.
Yes.
As we move through our day-to-day, are there other practices like that you recommend to people?
Oh, anything whatsoever. When any experiential presence just has a certain wow factor, any kind of a just a little whatever. Let yourself really feel that. Pause. I mean, you don't need to literally pause, but just value that, because that is the very cutting edge of yoga. Being where the experience is explicitly presenting as something that you can't possibly describe. Like you're walking along and you see a beautiful flower and you just go, oh. Or you see a beautiful sunset, or you see something horrible or ugly, whatever. Just anytime you see, I'm using see here, but this is not visually biased. Anywhere within your experiential field, when there's anything that just spontaneously appears, it just it's just something. Just let yourself feel that. Don't try to make sense of it or not. Just tune into it, feel it. Tune into its vibe and just, drink its flavor. Whatever. You play with it and you sort of. And again, just do that when it happens. Don't try to hold it. It will, sooner or later, probably sooner, it will drift off and you'll be distracted or something. Just let it go. And then then sooner or later something else will come up very similar. I can do that and let it go. And that right there is the entire practice of yoga. And you do that in these little snippets, and one day you realize. Because every time there's one of those acknowledgements or tuning into that wow factor, there's revelation occurring. And revelation is cumulative. So even though there's these little snippets, they build on each other. They retrain you. You know, we were talking earlier about sensitivity training. They retrain you to be able to perceive what's there and to be sensitive to what's there in a non-linear transcendental way, because that's what is there. So you're getting outside of your human orientation. You're getting outside of your conceptual orientation. I mean, not you're getting it, but you're explicitly being with experience outside of those modes. And in doing so, you're training yourself to do it better. Every time you do it, next time you'll be able to do it better, but spontaneously, without needing to try or do anything about it. And that right there is the entire practice of yoga. And you feel free to do any kind of experiments and so you want to. That's all fun. It's all gravy. But the nuts and the meat and potatoes of it is really just these little ongoing snippets of wow factor just during the course of your day.
Which is like, in Dzogchen terms, would be the familiarization of these glimpses of great thought, or the recognition, moments of recognition.
Yes. But be with it light, be with it playfully. Appreciate it, drink it when it's there, but don't hold it. It will almost instantly morph, or you'll drift off, or the whole thing will just go sideways, and just let that go. I mean, it won't go anywhere, but don't try to grab it. You're not acquiring something, you're being shown something. And what you're being shown you already have. So there's no need to hold it. And the more you see it, the more easily you'll be able to see it and recognize it, that you already have it. And then you'll have it more because you do.
Isn't that why it's so great to be around children? Because that's what they do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Children are wonderful. Yeah. And a lot of this is, in a sense, a lot of this is an antidote to having grown up. When you were a newborn, you were not a human being. What were you? Just, and you were indoctrinated over a period of years and brainwashed into thinking you're a human being and thinking you're in a body and thinking you're in other situations and obligations and responsibilities and limitations and blah, blah, blah. And so, but the little baby never went anywhere. All of that stuff is just layers piled on top of it. And so that wow factor is what things look like to the newborn. And so you're retraining yourself, resensitizing yourself to be able to tune into that. A light and carefree and playful attitude is very helpful because it tends to undermine the purposeful, contrived, trying to go look for it, or trying to create it, or trying to, let me go find the wow factor. Because then you're in a mindset that is intrinsically contrary to what that is. So if you're very light and playful and it's like, what the hell, whatever, I'm good, and all of a sudden something will show up, bang, oh yeah, nice, whatever, you go out of your business. Contrivance and trying to accomplish something, trying to do something is not actually evil. It's not actually the enemy, but it's definitely an entrenched egoic functioning, and is liable to be a manifestation or reinforcement of what yoga is trying to help you grow beyond.
So I'm confused as when you said, instead of going to the forest or whatever, go to the slums. So what's,
Well, the point is to, this is an experiment. Do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. Well, I mean, whatever the specifics are, because you're getting outside of your normalcy. And normalcy can be a subtle kind of a prison that you trap yourself, not literally trap, but seemingly limit yourself into by identifying with it. Oh, I'm the kind of person that is like this and does this and does this and likes this and doesn't like that, which is fine. You don't need to, you're not trying to deny that or undermine it. But this is just sort of deliberately going against the grain to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do, just for the novelty of it, just as an experiment. Well, I've never done that before. I wonder what that's like. Let me just try it. You don't need to like it. You don't need to do it again. But just an experiment to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do, just to get outside your normalcy. And then your sense of yourself can reshape itself as, well, I'm a person that can take chances. I'm a person that can do things that I don't ordinarily do. Doesn't mean you have to do them all the time, but it just destabilizes the subliminal interpretation of your self-identification, self-image. It's not a big deal, but it's it's a chipping away at that rock, so to speak. Chipping away at that non-existent rock.
Like the charnel grounds.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same thing. That's precisely the same thing. Children, all that, feeding the demons. Like, who would want to do that?
Yeah.
That sounds like fun. Let's do that. Yeah, that's a good time. These guys know how to party. Bring a fence along, But none of these kinds of experiments are particularly important in themselves. The main thing, the really powerful thing is just seeing, anytime you have an occasion of seeing that experience beyond what you're holding it to be, what you think it is. You're not heavy-handedly so. You're not trying to dismantle anything. Just notice that, wow, it's like there's more things in heaven and earth than you're dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. And experience is constantly presenting that. And so let yourself see it every once in a while. And right away you'll know, well, gosh, if my description of this isn't capturing it at all, then what is it that's here? And why do I bother describing it the way I do? What's the point? And that makes that whole, it undermines the interpretive mechanism at the root. So you don't need to dismantle your interpretations one by one. Just the whole principle of mental interpretation as a whole, as an entirety, becomes progressively invalidated. And it's, wow, what's going on here is inconceivably more and other than what I would describe it as being. My narration of what's happening here is paltry and tiny. What's happening here is all this. Wow. And the more explicit that becomes in your experience, then the less power these interpretations have to grab you and claim to be real, claim to be true.
As we were talking earlier, the pleasure at times of being in a movie and believing it's real, or being in your dream and believing it's real, and even waking up sometimes from the dream and kind of wishing you could get back to what you thought was real.
Yeah.
Do you feel that radiant presence itself loves to sometimes lose itself, which seems to be the essence of what's going on with
Oh, radiant
always
presence is a junkie.
That's what I
Radiant presence is a slut for radiant presence.
Yeah.
Radiant presence rolls over and says, "Do me," to itself. It's complete. It's completely addicted. It loves all this stuff. It loves. Yeah.
It's a great theme for Halloween. Radiant presence party.
The slut radiant presence. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Radiant presence just loves it all.
That's where it seems sort of, I guess, the paradox of so many of these religions have, whether it's Buddhism or Christian, so much of a basis on forbidding the essence of pleasure, which I've never quite.
But religion is complex because it's confused with social mechanisms and social structures and political structures and cultural biases and all these kinds of things. So it's not a simple thing. It's not pure.
Yes.
A lot of it, a lot of it is sort of crowd control. The structure is built into religion that is beneficial or limiting or keeps the lid on for a society in terms of keeping things civilized, so that the rich people can continue to skim, as we're all familiar with. These days it seems to be less about Puritanism and more about fear in terms of control mechanism. But that's getting way off topic. And I hereby declare this an apolitical zone.
Well, if there's divine perfection in where we incarnate, these are probably, all these things that we see wrong with our world are probably things that we've come here to just relax with and know that
absolutely
it's not like it's out there. And
yeah, absolutely, they're the path of revelation.
It's interesting to see that in others. Like my wife gets really upset by the messes I make, but to me they're totally fine. It's like, why?
What's up with that?
Yeah, like, why are you upset with it? And to her, it's like completely opposite worldview. It's like looking at politics is just like that too. It's like,
And the damnedest thing is she thinks she's right. Oh, sorry. Sorry, ladies.
Well, yeah, she's right, but it doesn't change anything. It's still going to be a mess. I'm not going to change. So, anyway.
I feel pretty overwhelmed, or just the possibilities of infinite worlds, and they're all different, and all the beings in all these worlds are really uniquely who they are, and yet they're all radiant present. And then it's interesting to say, wow, this is really, why is it that I have chosen to come into this world? And to really relax with that, and know that there's no, it's really open to do with what I choose. There's no constriction. And if I get into a space of really condemning and judging and wishing it was different, it's very contracting.
And yet maybe going through that is itself part of your process.
Yeah.
It can't be found whether this is a process moving towards something or is a complete accident, random. And it's irrelevant to try to sort it out because it can't be found. All you can know is it is this, and its being this is this. And at the end, and after that, you're just making myths. It's all an intentional path, a process of whatever, going through all this stuff. Yeah, maybe, but at the end of the day, maybe not. Who knows? Maybe it's just endless random weirdness.
There's no reference points.
There is no reference points. There's a bumper sticker. I'd like to see that on the bumper of every car in America.
Yeah, we keep making them up on the fly constantly.
I like endless random weirdness. I think
That's a good one too, yeah. Yeah, that's probably a more fun one. No reference points is a little technical. That's for the nerds. The nerds can all have no reference points on their bumpers. All the cool people will have endless random weirdness. You know any cool people? I'm afraid all I know is nerds. Well, I'm thinking of it's quitting time. So thank you all very much for today, and I'll be here tomorrow at 10, ready to rock and roll, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. You guys need help with the chairs or just leave them?
We'll just leave it set up the way
We'll
it
just leave
is.
it like this, and you can leave anything you